Right before my sister's wedding, my parents suddenly took my baby from my arms and said, "You can't bring him in, he's not part of the family." I begged them not to make a scene. My father replied, "You made this choice when you got pregnant alone." 5 days later, my ex showed up with something in his hands. It's hard to explain the feeling of standing at the edge of a beautiful day, one that's supposed to be filled with joy, flowers, music, and realizing, within seconds, that you've been cut out of your own family. I was holding my 1-year-old son in my arms, wearing a pale blue dress that I'd picked out just for the occasion. It matched the flower accents on the collar of Silas's tiny shirt. I had imagined the day differently, imagining introducing my son to cousins, showing him the lights, maybe swaying with him a little when the music started. Just a quiet, warm evening with family, watching my sister get married. Instead, what happened that afternoon is something I don't think I'll ever forget. Not just because of the shock and humiliation, but because of how plainly it was all done. As if it were normal. As if it were acceptable. I remember my mother's face tense, smile painted on with precision, eyes darting toward the entrance of the chapel. She said nothing at first, just a quick hello and a glance at Silas. Then she leaned in and whispered, "Helena, are you planning to bring the baby into the ceremony?" I blinked. Yes, why wouldn't I? Her smile faltered, and then my father appeared beside her. No greeting. No warmth. Just a low voice. "You can't bring him in. He's not part of the family." I laughed, confused. I thought it was a joke, some awkward, poorly timed comment. But they were serious. Dead serious. And when I asked them to please not do this here, not now, my father looked at me the same way he did when I first told them I was keeping the baby and said, "You made this choice when you got pregnant alone." Then, without another word, he took my son out of my arms. Just like that. I froze. I felt the eyes of others on us. I don't know how many people were watching, but it felt like a spotlight had landed on me and every conversation in the building had stopped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to snatch Silas back. But I also knew my son hates loud noises and sudden movements. I knew if I fought, he'd cry. And I was terrified of him crying at his aunt's wedding and being blamed for ruining the day. That's what my parents would say. That I couldn't control myself. That I made everything about me. So I said nothing. I watched as they took him out of the chapel and placed him in the car with my uncle. I watched my son's tiny hand press against the window. And I walked into that church like I had no child. Like I was alone. Again. That's where this story really begins. Because everything that happened next, every quiet word, every sleepless night, every piece of the past that unraveled started with that moment. I was 34. I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. I was working part-time as a freelance designer while raising Silas on my own. I never expected a red carpet or applause from my family. But I had hoped, after everything, they would at least see him. Acknowledge that he was mine and by extension, theirs. But apparently, a child without a husband didn't count. After the ceremony, no one said anything to me. My sister waved vaguely across the room during the reception. There was no seat for Silas at the table. No mention of him in the toast. I left before dessert. That night, I rocked Silas to sleep in our apartment while the stars blinked quietly over the mountains. I stared at his face, his tiny lashes, the way his fists curled into his chest when he was calm, and I thought, why do they hate him? Why do they hate me for choosing him? That was the thing that broke me most. Not just the rejection, but how casual it all was. The following days were filled with silence. No one reached out. No one checked on me. My mom posted pictures from the wedding, all smiles and lace and floral arrangements with a caption about family blessings. I was tagged in one photo, standing in the background with my arms crossed. Then, 5 days later, the unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. It was 8:43 a.m. I remember the time because Silas had just finished his morning nap and I was halfway through making oatmeal. I wasn't expecting anyone. I still hadn't emotionally recovered from the wedding. I was barely holding it together. I opened the door and there stood Darren. He hadn't been to our place in almost 9 months. He looked off. Tired. His hoodie was wrinkled, and he held something in his hands, a thick manila envelope, bulging with papers. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I expected a guilt-ridden apology or some offhand offer to take Silas for the weekend, something to make himself feel better. But instead, he said, "I heard what happened at your sister's wedding." I didn't even ask how. I didn't care. I was too shocked to form a sentence. Then he said, "I'm not going to let them do this to you. Or him." He held up the envelope. And suddenly, everything changed. I stepped aside without saying a word. He walked in quietly, like someone who wasn't sure they were allowed in anymore, and honestly, I wasn't sure either. The last time Darren was in my apartment, I was 6 months pregnant, crying on the couch, asking him if he was going to stay. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just left a half-eaten sandwich on the table and walked out. A week later, he blocked me on Instagram. So yeah, I had some feelings. He sat down at the edge of the couch. Silas toddled over, curious as ever. He didn't know this man. Not really. Darren had only seen him a couple of times in passing, no overnight visits, no co-parenting discussions. That wasn't his thing. Responsibility, it seemed, wasn't either. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing to Silas. I gave a slight nod. Silas, true to his nature, wobbled forward, inspecting Darren's shoes like a scientist. Darren smiled a little. It looked almost foreign on his face. He reached for the envelope on the coffee table. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. "I told her what happened. About the wedding. The way they treated you, the way they treated him." He opened the envelope and started spreading documents on the table: legal language, notarized letters, a custody amendment. "I'm giving up formal visitation," he said quietly. "I'm signing over full physical and legal custody to you. Permanently. You deserve to have control. Not them. Not me. You." I blinked, stunned. I didn't move. Didn't breathe, for a second. "Why?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair. "Because I watched a video someone posted from the wedding. That moment when they took him from you. It was hard to watch. I kept thinking, that's my son. That's the woman I said I loved for 3 years. And I let it get this far." I didn't know if I believed him or if I could, but for the first time in a long time, it sounded like regret. Not just surface-level guilt. Not just words to sound good. Real, weighty regret. He looked up. "They don't get to claim him. They don't get to make him feel unwanted. So I'm making sure they can't." The envelope also included a draft of a statement Darren had prepared. He was willing to testify in family court if I needed it. He detailed his abandonment, how he'd failed to support us, how my parents used that as justification to alienate Silas. He wasn't doing it for custody, or visitation, or some shared parenting dream. He was doing it so I could finally close the door on that chapter. And that scared me because it meant maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have to carry this all on my own anymore. The next few days were a blur of lawyer calls, document reviews, and for the first time ever calm. Strange calm. My lawyer was impressed with the paperwork Darren brought. She said it was one of the cleanest voluntary custody transfers she'd seen. Still, we needed to take the next step. The court would need a copy. And if I wanted any hope of ensuring my parents wouldn't meddle again, I'd need to file a formal family boundary agreement, nothing dramatic, just legal recognition that certain lines had been crossed and wouldn't be tolerated again. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. But here's the thing, word got out. My cousin Lara, bless her impulsive, oversharing heart, posted a few cryptic Instagram stories that week. One of them said, "Wild that someone's parents will fake being holy at church than disown their own grandkid. Y'all really smiling for the camera while burying your shame in the parking lot." She didn't mention names. But people knew. Then came the calls. First, it was my Aunt Rochelle. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what happened at the wedding. If I'd known." Then my mother. Crying. "Helena, we didn't mean it like that. You misunderstood. It was just a stressful day." Rosalie was nervous and we were trying to keep things calm. "It wasn't personal. Right?" I asked her one question, "Would you have done that if I was married?" She went silent. "I didn't push. I didn't need to." A few hours later, my father called. Short, gruff. "You're blowing this out of proportion. That boy has no place in our family name unless you do things properly. You're being emotional." I hung up without a word. 2 weeks passed. Darren started visiting more. Not just as a father, but as a man trying to make things right. He didn't push. He didn't ask for anything. He just showed up. Sometimes with diapers. Sometimes with coffee. Once with Silas's favorite apple sauce that he'd driven 45 minutes to find because the local store was out. He never tried to hold Silas unless I offered. Never posted pictures or asked to be tagged. He was just there. I didn't trust it right away. I couldn't. Trust isn't something you owe someone just because they feel bad. But I watched him with Silas, and I saw something that surprised me: gentleness. Not performative, not for me. Just quiet attention. The way he helped Silas stack blocks. The way he crouched low so they were eye level. The way he never once looked at his phone. I wasn't sure what it meant. I wasn't sure what we were anymore. But I knew this version of him, this present, humble man, was someone I could let in the room again. Even if just a little. And then, the email came. My parents' lawyer. A polite, sterile message informing me they were seeking grandparent visitation rights. Framed under concern for the child's well-being. I laughed out loud when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. They couldn't pretend to be the loving grandparents while hiding their shame behind closed doors. And now, faced with exposure, they were grasping at legality. But I was ready. My lawyer had everything: Darren's statement, the footage from the wedding, the social media posts, text messages. We filed a response, not just opposing the motion, but countering with a request for court-ordered restrictions. Not to punish them. To protect Silas. To protect us. The court date came faster than I expected. There was something surreal about it. Standing in a quiet hallway, clutching a folder full of documents, next to Darren of all people. The same man who once ghosted me at a prenatal appointment was now offering to testify on my behalf against my parents. He didn't say much. Just stood beside me, calmly flipping through his own copy of the file. I could feel his nerves in the way he tapped his foot, but his expression didn't change. Focused. Clear. My parents arrived late. My mother was dressed like she was heading to church, navy blouse, pearls, and soft perfume that I remembered from childhood. My father walked ahead of her, straight-backed, tight-lipped. He didn't even look at me. The judge was kind. Older woman. Wore her glasses halfway down her nose and seemed to have no patience for performance. That helped. She asked straightforward questions, and when my parents tried to spin their behavior at the wedding as an emotional misunderstanding, she cut through it. What exactly made the child's presence unacceptable at his aunt's wedding? She asked. My father stiffened. It wasn't that he was unwelcome. It's that, well, it wasn't an appropriate setting for a baby. Then why did you say he wasn't part of the family? She asked, flipping through the printed screenshots I'd provided. Silence. Darren was called next. He kept his answers short but powerful. Admitted his own failures. Said he had been absent not because Helena had kept him away, but because he had chosen distance. That no one had ever restricted his access, and that Helena had always made decisions in Silas's best interest. Then he said, and even when I was too much of a coward to show up, she did. Every single day. She never asked for anything. She just gave in. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. Then it was my turn. I didn't go in with a speech prepared. I just spoke from where it hurt. I don't want to keep my parents away out of spite. I want to protect my son from people who make him feel like he's not enough. Who treats him like an inconvenience or a shameful secret. That's what they did at that wedding, and that's not love. The judge nodded slowly, then leaned back. It didn't take long. She denied my parents' petition for visitation. But more than that, she included a statement in her ruling about the psychological impact of exclusion on a child's identity and the importance of consistency and respect in familial relationships. My parents left the courtroom without looking at me. And just like that, I felt the tension in my chest, the kind I'd been carrying since that awful afternoon at the chapel, begin to loosen. The fallout came slowly. My mother sent a few emails in the weeks that followed. Some emotional, some angry. One was 2 paragraphs of passive-aggressive scripture. I didn't reply to any of them. Rosalie never reached out. I had to mourn the idea of a family I never really had. I spent more time outside. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I'd put Silas in his high chair on the patio and paint landscapes while he watched me, peanut butter smudging on his cheeks. Darren started coming by more regularly. Sometimes just to drop off groceries or bring Silas a book. Sometimes he sits with me on the porch after bedtime and talks. Real talk. Not just surface-level stuff. I didn't know what we were. But I didn't need to know yet. For once, I was okay living in the moment, letting things unfold slowly, honestly. One afternoon, I took Silas to the park. There was a group of older women sitting on a bench nearby, watching their grandkids on the swings. One of them smiled at me and said, "Your boy's got good energy. You're doing a great job, Mom." I felt my throat catch. Not because it was anything dramatic, just because it was the first time in a long time someone had said something kind without expecting anything in return. And it reminded me of something I hadn't thought of in a while. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. A life. A foundation. Not the kind my parents tried to give me, built on appearances and reputation and shame. Something better. Months passed. Fall settled in over Asheville. The leaves along the Blue Ridge Parkway turned amber and gold. Silas loved crunching through them on our morning walks, bundled in a hoodie, fists full of acorns and sidewalk chalk. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the court ruling. Not because I was angry though, yes, I was, but because I had nothing left to say. And I think that, more than anything, was what they couldn't stand. The silence. The lack of drama. The fact that I just moved on. Darren kept showing up, not in big romantic gestures, but in small, steady ones. He started joining us for Sunday breakfasts. Sometimes we'd go to the farmer's market, sometimes just stay in with pancakes and cartoons. He asked about Silas's milestones. He showed up to his 2nd birthday party not just as a guest, but as someone who helped hang decorations, poured juice, and picked up smashed cupcakes without complaint. I told him, honestly, that I didn't know what we were. That I didn't have space in my heart for another disappointment. He just nodded. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm just asking to be here." And he was. But even as I found myself slowly rebuilding trust with him, with myself, the past kept knocking. My mother tried one more time. It was a letter this time. Handwritten. 2 full pages. Carefully worded, as if it had been revised and rewritten dozens of times. No apology. Not really. Just a careful mix of guilt and spiritual appeals. A few paragraphs about forgiveness. A note about how Rosalie was trying for a baby. An offer to start again as a family. I folded it neatly, tucked it into a drawer. And then I made a decision. There's an annual fundraising gala at the Botanical Gardens, black tie, wine glasses, string quartet, the whole thing. My parents have attended for years. My father even served on the planning committee for a while. That year, Darren was given 2 tickets by a client, some real estate guy whose website I helped design. He asked if I wanted to go. Normally, I would have said no. But this time? I said yes. Not to cause a scene. Not to get back at anyone. But because I had every right to show up as myself. I wore a deep green dress, hair swept up, nothing flashy, just simple and soft and confident. Darren wore a dark suit. Silas stayed home with Laura, who was thrilled to babysit. We walked in and within 20 minutes, I spotted them. My parents. My mother's smile froze when she saw us. My father's mouth twitched, like he wasn't sure whether to nod or walk away. I didn't go to them. I didn't need to. We chatted with friends. Shared a glass of wine. Laughed with people who'd seen me struggle and stuck around anyway. At one point, I caught my mother watching us from across the room. Her face was unreadable, maybe regret, maybe resentment, maybe both. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. Because at that moment, I realized something. They had spent so long trying to define who I was, the single mother, the one who messed up, the daughter who disappointed them, and I had finally stepped outside of that definition. And the most satisfying revenge? Was becoming someone they couldn't control, couldn't guilt, and couldn't pretend didn't exist. That night, after we got home and Silas was asleep, Darren stood in the kitchen washing 2 wine glasses. I leaned against the doorway and just watched him for a moment. The quiet way he moved, the ease of it. "Thank you," I said. He looked over his shoulder. "For what?" "For showing up," I said. "Not just tonight. For all of it." He didn't say anything right away. Just turned, drying his hands on a towel. I spent a long time thinking I wasn't enough, I admitted. That I'd failed at everything, being a daughter, a partner, a parent. But I don't feel that way anymore. "You never failed," he said quietly. "You just started over when no one helped you. And you did it with grace." There was a pause. Then, gently, he said, "Can I stay a little longer tonight?" I nodded. Not because I needed him. But because, for the first time in years, I wanted him to be there, not out of desperation, but out of choice. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Not everything ties up with a neat little bow. There are still wounds. Still things unsaid. But what I've learned is this: sometimes, the best revenge is not a fiery confrontation or dramatic takedown. Sometimes, it's simply living well. Fully. Authentically. Raising your child with love, in a home free of shame. Reclaiming your story. And refusing to let anyone write your worth for you.